Welcome to the Academy of Esports, Episode 4. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. This is the podcast where I, as your host, break down and build back up those topics in education and esports that concern me. Esports allows schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote physical and mental health, and increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We cannot forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. So let's get started. And as we get started this week, it is one of those weeks where I'm kind of looking back on previous writings, things I have written about in esports and education in the past. In fact, earlier this week, tonight is Sunday, that I'm recording this podcast, I did an interview on last Monday night with Vicki Davis, the cool cat teacher. She does a podcast series called Education Matters. And about 3 years ago, in 2015, we did an interview back then. And the interview was really at the beginning of esports and education kind of getting together. At the time, I was the director of instructional technology at the Rockford Public School District in Rockford, Illinois. And it's kind of funny how we got started on esports and education. At least in Rockford it was. It's interesting how just fate sometimes brings people together, how common walls can create conversation, how putting people in the right places in a building can create instances where odd connections can take place. So when we think about esports, a lot of times we think about activities, and that draws us into athletics, especially in schools. And so it was my luck that my neighbor, office mate, I guess you could say, the person who shared a wall with me in the Rockford Public Schools was Matt Parker. And Matt is still currently the athletic director in Rockford. And Matt has led a very, what you would call, progressive approach to esports and education. And if you hear noise in the background, that's my two cats who decided now is the time to start wrestling around. But Matt has always been one who wants to create a diverse set of choices for students in schools. While Rockford does do things with the traditional sports, they also do things that are non-conventional. So, for example, about 6 years ago, actually now I believe, Rockford did something that a lot of school districts haven't considered doing before. They actually got rid of student grade checks. Now, if you're listening to me from somewhere else in the world, or maybe you're at a private school, let me kind of explain a little bit. In the high school level, a lot of times it's required for a student to have a certain grade point average in order to participate in certain sports. And the problem that Rockford was having was that the data was showing them that by students sitting out from sports because of low grades did not result in their GPAs increasing. In fact, they found that students were becoming less and less involved in their schools, and as a result, they were feeling more disconnected, and they weren't coming back to the sports. And in fact, I remember times where in the Rockford schools, football teams, for example, couldn't field enough players to play a game. In fact, Jefferson High School several years ago did not have a varsity team for the second half of their football season because of the lack of eligible players. And so when you look at a district like Rockford's, you see a district that's a high poverty, high needs school district. Rockford is one of those towns that for a number of years, before the Rust Belt era, was a very rich and wealthy town, and just west of Chicago, about an hour and a half away. And when the manufacturing trades start to shut down in the United States, Rockford fell in very hard times. It has one of the highest crime rates in the United States. The FBI had noted it for its high crime rate. And so, looking at the landscape of Rockford, Matt decided, and his friend and the assistant superintendent for the district, Matt Vosberg, they decided that it was time for them to do away with student grade checks. And what they did instead was bring in students and say, look, you're not making grades, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep you on the team. You'll still be eligible to play, but we're going to work with you as a student. We want you to come do training tables with us. We want you to do tutoring with us, and we're going to try to raise you up while still allowing you to participate in your athletics in the school. And they attracted the attention of ESPN, specifically the show Outside the Lines. And the show Outside the Lines came in and checked out what Rockford was doing and said, we want to come back and look at your data in a few years. And Matt Parker very openly said, in fact, yes, you can come back, you can call me on this, and I'll provide you all the data you need, and we will show you the successes that we are having because of this. Matt predicted this years in advance. And so when ESPN's show came back, Outside the Lines came back, they did find that the athlete graduation rates had gone up, athlete GPAs had gone up, and in fact, the sports teams did much better. And a lot of times in education, we ask our teachers to build relationships with kids. How do we get kids to succeed? Why are these kids failing so much? Why are we having so many difficulties with kids? Well, we're told we need to build relationships. But if one of the places a child feels connected to a school is in athletics, and if they have trouble academically and they can't participate in athletics anymore, where is that connection supposed to take place? Where are we as educators supposed to meet those students to build those relationships to help bring them back out and bring them forth and bring them success, help them bring them success in their educational field? So in Rockford's situation, what you had was when kids were kicked off the teams, there was really no place for them to go. Again, a high poverty, high needs school district, a lot of these kids would roam the streets, not be connected to anything, become affiliated with gangs. Potentially, I worked in the alternative school environment, and there was a number of kids I looked at the alternative high school who I would say, God, they would make a tremendous athlete. But for whatever reason, they were no longer connected to their schools fully. So it's important for us as we're thinking about all of this is how are we creating opportunities, not just for diversifying our athletic opportunities, but also all opportunities for student participation. So it just so happened, knowing Matt's history, knowing that these things are going on at the back end of Rockford Public Schools, where we're saying grade checks aren't something that are going to be required anymore, Matt was always very progressive about bringing in other student opportunities. So, for example, I also played rugby in Rockford, Illinois, and the rugby team there became very active and interested in wanting to help promote rugby in the high schools. We didn't have a specific rugby team in the high school, in the Rockford area there for high school students, but we wanted to have an opportunity for kids to at least experience rugby in some shape or form in the high school or middle school environment. And so through conversation with Matt Parker, and we were able to bring in and promote some simple rugby curriculum. Again, it was something that Matt saw as a way to diversify the offerings for students and open their eyes to something else that they could do, something that they could connect to in the community. So I swear I'm going to get to esports in a second with all this, but it's important, I feel, to lay the groundwork to show you that Matt, while may look like he may look like your, what some may think a stereotypical athletic director on the surface, I can tell you philosophically that Matt Parker is probably one of the most progressive people when it comes to seeing his role in athletics, because he wants 100% participation. He wants something for everybody. And esports is just another opportunity for us to have something for everybody. So it just so happened I was passing the assistant superintendent in the hallway, just having casual conversation, nothing too serious. And he says, "Hey, did you see what was on 60 Minutes the other night?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, there was kids playing video games competitively, and I think there were scholarships involved. Would you mind checking this out?" And of course I wanted to check this out. I kind of knew it, I had known about this, but it was something that I don't know why I didn't feel the need at the time or before that to look into something like this, because even I, for a while, suffered from that stigma, looking at esports and saying, God, why would we want to do anything like that? Which is silly, considering that some of the best connections that I had with some of my students was when I started teaching in 1999 in Lansing, Illinois. We had a game club, we called it a computer club back in 1999, because I felt that a gaming club would be a little silly. But as part of the computer club, gaming was a component of it. Now, the other components were, of course, how to network our computers together so that we could play the games. We couldn't just, say we want to play a game. So the game that we all played was StarCraft, and we had all the computers networked together. These were computers that I had rebuilt from spare parts. They were older systems, but they were good enough to run the game. And we had to network them together, and we had to get everybody on the same game server and set up the gaming environment so that we could all play. And a lot of those students with which were in that club are students that to this day, so that's 19 years later. These are students who I'm still in contact with today, who I know keep contact with through Facebook. They have kids of their own, believe it or not. And the gaming was definitely a vehicle to something more. It was a vehicle to showing them so many other things that they could do with computers and computer gaming and computer networking and design and just camaraderie, communication, friendship. I mean, it was all these other things beyond just the game. I mean, we can still talk about the game, but I couldn't tell you who won when we played. The game, again, we played with StarCraft. I couldn't tell you who the best player was out of all of us, but I could tell you that we had fun doing it. And it was in an environment that a lot of these kids, none of these kids were on the basketball team. I don't know. I don't think any of them played football in high school. So this was an opportunity for them that they had to really belong to something. Now you may say, "Oh, Hagen, why don't you just create a gaming club?" I want to make sure that we understand again the formalities of all this too, because when we were talking about this in Rockford, Matt saw the importance of having this be a sanctioned varsity event. Now, again, this is not a club. In fact, we started with saying to a club, there was a teacher at Guilford High School, his name's Jeff Pittner, and Jeff was the gaming club coordinator, and we said we wanted to formalize this a little bit more. And I actually created a more of a solid proposal around specific equipment that we would need: microphones, computer gaming mice, laptops, gaming laptops specifically, that would allow them to take their club and formalize it to another level. Now, back at this time, too, understand that the promise of a scholarship at the collegiate level was a lot less likely than it is today, because back then there was really only one university at the time that I knew of who was offering a college scholarship, and that is Robert Morris University. Today, there are almost 70 colleges and universities around, I guess, the United States. I don't know if that's worldwide, but it's in the United States that has a scholarship of some kind for students to participate in esports at the collegiate level. That's an average of $7,000 a year, which is a good chunk of money. Whether you're in state or out of state, $7,000 a year is $7,000 a year. I'm a father who has 3 children, one of whom is 14 and is talking to me about colleges. And in fact, this weekend, I took her to our local gaming lounge called Not Your Parents' Basement Gaming Lounge in Racine, Wisconsin. And I had all 3 kids there, and we were playing video games, and I keep looking there. And it's kind of like, I guess, how a parent might go to a baseball game and look at their kids and go, gosh, I really hope they can hit a baseball really far. I hope they can pitch really fast. And I'm looking at my kids going, gosh, I hope one of them wins the Battle Royale at Fortnite. You know, that person finishes number 1. That's what I really wish to see right now. Because as it was announced a couple weeks ago, Ashland University in Ohio is actually now going to offer a Fortnite scholarship specifically. But looking at the opportunities that we had in Rockford, we got the team started at Guilford. Didn't take very much for us to get the funding that we needed, which was great. And sadly, after that year, I left the Rockford School District, but the momentum that was started from that one team, from that one instance in Rockford at one high school, led to 4 high schools having teams. So that was Guilford, Jefferson, East High School, and Auburn High School in Rockford. All had, those are all your public school teams. And then I believe Rockford Christian, Boylan Catholic School, and I believe the Lutheran School. It might have been Racine Christian, Rockford Christian Life. I believe they also had an esports team within a year. So it took 1 year, one spark, one thing, for this to become a citywide event. And now when you look at the landscape in Illinois is close to sanctioning esports as the IHSA, seeing that as a sanctioned event, as a sanctioned sport. They haven't picked which specific games will be sanctioned, but they're saying that they would like to take esports serious enough that they would then see them as being as legitimate as football, basketball, baseball, gymnastics, lacrosse, all those other sports. So it's happening. But I got into some conversations in the last few weeks because I found myself having to defend esports as athletics. And last week in the podcast, I talked about the medium being the vehicle to get you to something more. I mean, the gaming is one thing, but there's so many other facets of esports that we need to consider. Not just the gaming component of it, but also the ancillary things. Actually, I shouldn't call them ancillary. I should say these are the things that are going to drive people to careers more likely than being a pro gamer outside of a scholarship. And there was also then one of the things I pulled heavily on in all of this was the ISTE Standard for students. Now, the ISTE Standard for students, ISTE is the International Society for Technology in Education. That's ISTE. In fact, their college, their international, sorry, I keep messing that up, but their international conference is coming up in Chicago here very soon. And they came up with 7 standards. Now, these are standards for students to prepare them to thrive in a constantly evolving technology landscape. So when we think about buying computers, if you're just buying computers to buy computers so that kids can type papers, you're missing out on a much bigger world. And when I look at esports, I look at it and say, if you're just going to do esports to let kids play games, you're missing out on a much bigger world here. So the 7 standards for esports revolve around these 7 concepts. The empowered learner, number 1. So again, number 1, empowered learner, where students leverage technology to take an active role in choosing, achieving, and demonstrating competency in their learning goals informed by their learning sciences. Number 2, the digital citizen. Students recognize the rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of living, learning, and working in an interconnected digital world, and they act and model in ways that are safe, legal, and ethical. Number 3 standard, knowledge constructor. Students critically curate a variety of resources using digital tools to construct knowledge, produce creative artifacts, and make meaningful learning experiences for themselves and others. Number 4, innovative designer. Students use a variety of technologies within a design process to identify and solve problems by creating new, useful, or imaginative solutions. Number 5, computational thinker. Students develop and employ strategies for understanding and solving problems in ways that leverage the power of technological methods to develop and test solutions. Number 6, creative communicator. Students communicate clearly and express themselves creatively for a variety of purposes using the platforms, tools, styles, formats, and digital media appropriate to their goals. And number 7 standard, global collaborator. Students use digital tools to broaden their perspectives and enrich their learning by collaborating with others and working effectively in teams globally and locally. So you have these standards. Now, these standards are what are looked at as an educator. If you're looking in the technology field and how you're using technology, what ISTE says is if you don't explore these standards, if you do not use these standards with technology, you're missing out on a much bigger opportunity that you have. And so I looked at this and said, well, wait a second. I look at each one of these things: empowered learner, digital citizen, knowledge creator, innovative designer, computational thinker, creative communicator, global collaborator. Each one of those things, I can tell you how esports connects into each one of those. Now, you may say, oh, Hagen, you got to be kidding me. But I'm telling you, esports is in every one of these. In fact, if you go to my website right now, taoesports.com, you should find a series of blog posts on that website. So if you go to the blog section, you'll find a series of blog posts that I wrote a couple of years ago detailing how esports connects into each one of these standards. So, for example, in the empowered learner, the first standard, the standard is this. So when we're talking about the empowered learner, students leverage technology to take an active role in choosing, achieving, and demonstrating competency in their learning goals informed by the learning scientists. Now, the indicator for that is articulate and set personal learning goals, develop strategies leveraging technology to achieve them, and reflect on the learning process itself to improve learning outcomes. Now, as a League of Legends competitor, personal learning goals are not solely personal. You are working with a team, but the game statistics and the ability to replay an entire match allows for each competitor to critically analyze their successes, failures, and provide a pathway for valuable reflection. That's because of the technology. Now, the students and coach may then take the feedback from those matches and make the training personal to achieve their ever-changing goals. So an active participant on a well-run team, not just a club, must be empowered. Now, indicator B says the students build networks and customize their learning environments in ways that support the learning process. Now, Me personally, at one point, I decided I was going to try to get competent in the game League of Legends. And what I discovered is not just support through looking at things like strategy wikis or watching YouTube or Twitch videos or blogs, but there's a supportive community of gamers around the world willing to help newcomers learn and enjoy the game. That may partly explain why there's roughly 70 to 100 million active users of the game League of Legends around the world. And it is uniquely important that this culture around the game breeds empowered learners. It's fascinating to see. And then indicator 1C works great with the other two. Students use technology to seek feedback that informs and improves their practice and to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways. Students, again, may review all their matches online. They can look at everything from beginning to end. They can receive feedback, seek feedback from others in a match. And in addition, feedback comes from those who may have watched a broadcast of the match. Okay, so if the match was broadcasted over the internet. Now think about that. If I'm a football player and my team is competing against somebody else, am I going to get feedback from other football players necessarily on my gameplay? Probably not. The only feedback I'm likely going to get is going to be from a coach most of the time. You may get some from a parent or maybe another teammate, but a lot of the times you're not going to get feedback from other players about your gameplay. So this is a unique opportunity to empower yourself as a learner. And then the last indicator is students understand the fundamental concepts of technology operations, demonstrate the ability to choose, use, and troubleshoot current technologies, and are able to transfer their knowledge to explore emerging technologies. So this doesn't just mean that the students install the game on the computer. Full optimization of the environment is important in a game, measured on split-second decisions and actions. Students can build the computer on which they install the game. They can optimize the network over which the game runs. They can research ways to gain an advantage over their opponent, or they can develop and share their own ways and best practices at playing a game such as League of Legends. An empowered learner, all from playing what someone only sees as a video game. That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan, and you may follow at Jim O'Hagan on Twitter. That's spelled JIMOHAGAN. And while you're at it, you can also follow TAO Esports. That's spelled TAOESPORTS on Twitter. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com and through Flipboard or your favorite RSS app. Follow the latest in esports news and research directly impacting education. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.